Well, hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. You can probably see the big news that I have, which is that I finally, after all this time, succumbed to a quarantine haircut. So, new look. And kind of excited about it actually, because I've always really wanted to have really short hair, because now the nice thing about this is I can wake up in the morning, it's good to go. I can take a shower, don't need to arrange it. It's pretty good to go. You don't need to know this, but I have a lot of cowlicks. So this is easy. I don't know why I resisted it for so long in lockdown. It's going to be fun. Anyway, we are here to do my reading wrap up for the month of August, not talk about my hair. So let's get into that. So August, if you follow along, was kind of a rough reading month. For me, a lot of this is because just, general things going on, life being busy, work being busy, but the news has been pretty nuts this month. And because of the news, even though I haven't been directly impacted by a lot of it, it's been stressful, and the stress kind of gets to you after a while. And then in the latter part of the month, my foster son has been recovering from surgery, so there's just been a lot. So while I had a really great reading month in July, it did not necessarily translate, but there are some good reads and some things that I'm very excited to tell you about. So in the month, let's start with the stats. I DNF'd 3 books. I finished 3 books, and I have 2 books that are carrying into September with me. And let's kind of get into those. So of the DNFs, the very first book is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I was actually listening to this on audio because I had put a hold on it, and it became available finally. There's a really long hold list for the audio on this at my library. I made it a fair chunk of the way through this on audio, but I just wasn't getting a lot of listening done. I took too long, basically. So it had to get returned, and I put myself back on the wait list because I very much intend to finish this book. So it's a DNF in August, but I will definitely be revisiting this book. It will not be a DNF permanently. You might be wondering, if I have a copy of the book, why am I waiting for the audiobook? Well, it's just because in the meantime, I've got other things going on, which we'll talk about. It's Greg logic. I can't explain it. And now because I started it on audio, I feel like I need to finish it on audio. And there's just too many other things upcoming in September that maybe if I haven't gotten the audio by October, I'll pick up the book. Like I said, it's Greg logic. I can't explain it. But it is what it is. So currently I'm back on hold for the audio. I think it will be coming up sometime in October. And if it's not by then, I may pick up the book again. Point just being, I'm definitely going to finish this book at some point. If you're unfamiliar, it's the story of 2 sisters, both who are light-skinned black. One of them decides to pass as white. The other one marries a dark-skinned man, has a family, and it's about the different paths that their lives take as a result of that decision. It's a fascinating story, and I would very much like to see where it goes. Ultimately, a lot of people have, when I ended up having to return it, a lot of people commented to say how much they like it, and I know I've seen a lot of good feedback on it. So, very much looking forward to finishing this. It will not be a DNF forever. And you guys can hold me accountable for that. The next book that I DNF'd in the month of August was Hondo by Louis L'Amour, and I talked about this a little bit. I was not enjoying this book. It was something I picked up because I felt like as part of my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, I wanted to experience genres that I don't traditionally read. I've read 2 other Western novels, but I wanted to try Louis L'Amour because he is seen as one of the masters of the genre, and his writing has more of like that kind of commercial spin to it. So I was kind of a little bit curious to try one of those. I did not get along really well with it at all. It is a very cliched story, and it relies on a lot of cliches, and it's very well written, but it's also very tired and predictable. And I thought the depiction of the character is just kind of the celebration of toxic masculinity, and I did not like it. And then they killed the dog, and at that point I was just said, nope, done. And this is something I DNF'd and will absolutely not revisit. If you're unfamiliar, it's the story of Hondo Lane, who is half Native American, half Caucasian, and he just gets up to adventures. The Native American people are treated as the villains, even though he is also half, and it's a lot. So definitely will not be finishing Hondo by Louis L'Amour, and I think I'm going to take a pass on other Louis L'Amour novels, because if that's an indication of what they are like, I don't need it in my life. And then the other book, and this is news from my Friday reads that I DNF'd in August, is Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. So at the time I did my check-in, my Friday reads, I had not done my check-in with Britta. I was buddy reading this with her, and we had indicated that we were going to try to hold out and see if we wanted to continue with the book. We kind of mutually agreed that it was a breaking point. And Britta is, I think, not going to finish this book. I may, if I have time, pick it up at the end of the year to see if it gets any better. The problem I'm having with this book, so if you're unfamiliar, it's the story of Marilyn Monroe, obviously in fictional version, and in the opening, Joyce Carol Oates will talk about some of the changes that she made that are departures from reality. For instance, Norma Jean Baker in real life went through several foster families. In the book, she only has one that is meant to be representative of the whole, and things like that. But so many of the choices that are made in this book don't quite make sense. And it's interesting because I was looking into a specific detail. I was trying to figure, some of the characters are referred to by like a letter, and I was trying to figure out who one of them is. And I stumbled on the Wikipedia page where it turns out this started as either a short story or a novella. And Joyce Carol Oates just found that she had a lot more to say, so she kept expanding and expanding, and then it became this brick of a novel over 700 pages. Yeah, over 700 pages. And it feels like she just put everything into the book. And I know it's an unfair criticism to say to make because I didn't finish it, but it just feels like there's so much and none of it is making a point. And when you get through half of a 700 plus page book and you don't know what it's trying to say, that's not good. And yes, you should always stick around until the end, and that's why I may revisit this if I have time at the end of the year. But I don't think it's going to get better. In fact, it might only get worse. And one of the things I was particularly intrigued about, in particular, was the idea of Norma Jean Baker versus Marilyn Monroe. If you've ever seen the movie My Week with Marilyn, it's a problematic movie. It's not great. But one of the most interesting moments in it is that Michelle Williams, playing Marilyn Monroe, looks at someone, and there's press, and she just says, "Do you want to see me be her?" And he's confused, and she just walks out in front of the press and turns on her Marilyn persona. And it's interesting to see in that moment how the whole Marilyn thing is an act that she puts on. It's not necessarily who she is. It's kind of just a wildly exaggerated version of herself. And she can turn it on and turn it off. But because that is who she's expected to be, she has all of these problems in her personal life. In this book, you don't actually really know who Norma Jean Baker is. And I think that's partially, at least, a deliberate choice of Joyce Carol Oates, because I think she wants you to be a spectator of Norma Jean rather than get inside her head. And I think that's a deliberate decision, but it doesn't work because it confuses Norma Jean and Marilyn, because Marilyn is definitely someone you consume, you look at, and you maintain a distance from because she is that object on the screen that is not real. But there's no real distinction between the two. And part of that is an interesting choice, but the other part just makes it really confusing and frustrating. And it doesn't quite work for me. And then it also tries to imply that Marilyn is like a persona that Norma Jean puts on, but it seems to work that there are times when Norma Jean is younger, like a child or a teenager, and she'll look in the mirror and she'll think that she sees somebody else trying to get out of her. And it's almost like Marilyn is like a split personality that comes out of her over time. And it's like Joyce Carol Oates can't make up her mind where Marilyn comes from in Norma Jean. And it doesn't really make sense. And it was interesting because in the first part, in checking in with Britta, I said, well, it's interesting. The book doesn't seem to have any warmth, but I think it has empathy toward Norma Jean and what happens to her. But as the book continues, it becomes fairly clear that it actually, not only does it not have any warmth, it also does not seem to have any empathy for Norma Jean. So, and I think part of that, again, is, at least part of it, is deliberate, because I think Joyce Carol Oates very much wants you to feel that you are complicit in what other people are doing to Norma Jean. And again, part of that is interesting, but part of that just doesn't work because of the way it's executed. And I think if she had treated Norma Jean like more of a person in the first place, like an understandable, relatable person, it would mean more. But because she's always just an object that's really difficult for you to get a hold of, it doesn't mean anything, and it just feels mean. It's like one of my problems with the movie Napoleon Dynamite is that it doesn't actually sympathize with the character of Napoleon. It wants you to laugh at him, and it feels like this book is doing something similar. It's making it difficult for you to sympathize with Norma Jean, but at the same time, it wants you to feel bad for not sympathizing with her or for being complicit in this commodifying of who she is. And I don't think it makes sense. And it's actually got me re-examining other books by Joyce. I've only read 2 other books than this one by Joyce Carol Oates. One of them is Zombie, which is deliberately, like, it's a special case because that book is about a serial killer. You're not supposed to sympathize with him. But the other book that I had read was Blackwater, which is a very slim volume compared to this, especially about, it takes the story of Mary Jo Kopechne, who was the woman who drowned in a car with Ted Kennedy in an accident. Instead of going for help, he went back home and called a family lawyer. So it's about her story. And one of the things that I praised it for when I first read it and in years since is that it doesn't go in for melodramatics. It doesn't really put you inside of her head. It understands that you are going to sympathize with the plight of the woman who is in the car slowly drowning in water. But now this has me re-examining that because that book also didn't have a lot of warmth in it. And now I'm thinking, it's like, was that a deliberate choice to not be melodramatic? Or does that book also just completely lack empathy? And these are my only experiences of Joyce Carol Oates, so I don't quite know. And I mean, part of it is that this is a very unpleasant book to read. And it's not that unpleasant books are necessarily bad. It just feels like it's unpleasant in a way that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't feel like it knows what it's doing. And that's very frustrating. So I'm talking about this book a lot. But you can see I have a lot of thoughts about it and a lot of conflicting things about it. But that's the book itself. I don't think it knows what it's trying to do. So part of me thinks it'll be interesting if there's time and motivation at the end of the year to come back to this and see if it comes to a point. I don't think it will. If you've read this book and you think it does, please let me know, because it's a DNF for now, and DNF for nows are dangerous for me. Like I feel like The Vanished Half is a different case. It's a DNF for now specifically because the library hold expired. DNFs where I say, all right, I don't want to deal with this right now, maybe I'll circle back to it, that kind of thing usually doesn't end up happening for me. So I'm putting it down. It's very likely I will not finish this book at all, but I may try to circle back to it at the end of the year. If you have opinions about this, I'm very curious, because, like I said, a lot could be determined by how the book shakes out in the end. And maybe some of my criticisms end up being addressed. Maybe it does cohere into a empathetic point about the life of Norma Jean Baker. But the half of it, especially when a book is over 700 pages, it's a lot to ask you to get through half of a book without knowing where it's going, what it's trying to do. So that alone is a deep flaw. But like I said, if you've read this book or if you've read other books by Joyce Carol Oates, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, because I'm very curious about that. Now let's move into the books that I finished. The first book that I finished in August was Deacon King Kong by James McBride. And what's funny is I keep a pile, if I have a physical copy of the book, I keep a pile of them. So by the end of the month, I will remember that I need to talk about it. And when I saw Deacon King Kong on the pile, I was like, no, I finished that in July. I don't need to talk about it. And then I double checked and no, I did finish it in the month of August. And what's interesting about that is that I started thinking, well, what did I think of this book? And I couldn't really remember. And it's probably not a good sign that not even a month after I finished this book, a lot of it is already starting to fade. Now, I did like it, but I think one of the things that's interesting and a little bit difficult with this book is that it feels like it was presented as something that it is not necessarily. So the premise of the book, as I was told, is that you have this man, Deacon King Kong. So King Kong is the name of the moonshine that they drink. But this man named Sportcoat is his actual nickname. And he shoots a drug dealer in his neighborhood, the cause houses. And the rest of the book is about the ramifications of that. Well, that is true. But when that was presented as the premise to me, I assumed that the shooting was intentional. And it is not. And that is not a spoiler because the book opens with that shooting. So it's not a spoiler. Basically, Sportcoat is drunk and confused and does get into an argument with the drug dealer, who he knows very well because he used to coach him in baseball. And I also assumed that the drug dealer died. He does not. And again, that's not a spoiler because that all happens in the beginning of the book. So I had an assumption of what this book was, and it's not. The shooting is an accident. The drug dealer survives. And it is about the ramifications of the shooting, but it's much more about the neighborhood and the people who live in it and their voices. And their voices are very interesting. James McBride is a great writer. If you have not read The Good Lord Bird, I would implore you, please read The Good Lord Bird. It's such a good book. I love it. It was my favorite book in the year that I read it. Deacon King Kong is a good book, but it kind of feels... It comes to a point, not like Blonde, but a lot of it, it's a very talky book. It's very dialogue heavy. Sections of it feel like almost like a play where two characters are just talking back and forth for a while. And I actually listened to the audiobook and had to use the book as a supplement because you'd have these really talky sections. A lot of the characters have nicknames, and because there are very talky sections, it'll refer back to somebody, and especially in the audio, it's a little bit hard to remember, okay, who's that? So I had to use the book as a supplement to the audio. So I would not recommend the audio. I'd recommend going with the book itself. It might help you keep track of the cast of characters better. But because it's so sprawling and there are so many stories and so much fit into it, it still feels a little blurry to me. And I understand what James McBride is doing, but it's interesting too because the premise is the shooting, but that's not actually the point of the book. The point of the book is the neighborhood and the things that have been done to these people and their relationship to the police. And I know all of that is really hard to capture in a marketing bullet point or blurb. And maybe the shooting seems like a much more natural hook, but it feels like it doesn't do the book justice for what it does. And I enjoyed it. There were a lot of indelible characters. There were a lot of really funny moments. So I feel like this is an interesting book, but to me, not a great book. It's a book I enjoyed, but didn't love. And I still recommend it, but I do think it also isn't necessarily good that so much of it had faded from my memory in less than a month. And it makes me wonder, in like a year, if you asked me to talk about this book, would I really have a lot that's coherent to say? And I don't want to go into the spoiler territory, but it feels like one of the big moment that it kind of builds to feels off. Like the plot line that leads to the quote-unquote big climactic emotional moment or the emotional high point of the book never felt relevant to me. It never felt urgent to me. And I know it's weird to talk about that without addressing what it is, but that part I feel like would be a spoiler. To talk about the shooting and what it actually means to the book is not a spoiler. It all happens at the beginning, but everything else I feel like you would need to read and decide for yourself. So I'm still very much looking forward to reading more books by James McBride. I have a collection of his short stories on my shelf. God, I can't remember the name of that collection. And it's not on the flap of the book either. So that's interesting. It's just kind of talking about other things. 5 Carat Soul is the collection of stories. So I have that on my shelf, and I really have always wanted to read The Color of Water for a very long time. So and by the way, again, if you have not read The Good Lord Bird, read The Good Lord Bird. Do it. This one is good, but it's not up on that level of greatness. So There you go. That is Deacon King Kong by James McBride. The next book that I finished in the month of August is the big one, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Oh my god, I love this book. I love this book so much I had to buy a copy so I would have it on my shelves just because I wanted it there. So if you haven't heard me raving about it, or if you haven't heard other people talking about it, you have to call it the story of Shakespeare's family. But what's interesting is that it's about Shakespeare's family without being about Shakespeare. And I think that's a really refreshing way to talk about Shakespeare and his life, because you don't see him as the playwright, you see him as the family man, which is a very different way of thinking about him. And his family, so many good characters. Somebody had commented to say that they had heard that Maggie O'Farrell is interested in doing another novel about his daughters. Hamnet was his son, who died at a young age. And a few years later, Shakespeare used his name in perhaps his most famous play, Hamlet. You know it, but I feel like I have to say it just in case. And somebody had said that he would be interested in writing, or Maggie O'Farrell would be interested in writing a novel about his two daughters, Judith and Susanna, and I would absolutely read that, especially since I'm hoping it would mean that we would get more about Agnes, who is their mother, of course, Shakespeare's wife, who is a fascinating character in her own right. But it's interesting as well because it is subtitled A Novel of the Plague. History does not actually know how Hamnet died. It only records that his death occurred, and then you can piece together that Hamlet was written just a few short years later, as well as a bunch of Shakespeare's other most famous plays, many of them tragic. It's such an interesting book. It is about family, it's about grief, and the character of Agnes, she is a woman who does not necessarily conform to what women are expected to do at the time. It's very much of the time it is set, and yet it feels timeless. It's beautifully written in many parts. It's heartfelt, and it says a lot about life and death, and it has mystical elements in it. Agnes is accused of being a witch by some of the people in town because she can sort of sense things about other people, and she uses herbs to heal people, and she has occasionally visions about the future. She had a vision that two children would be at her deathbed when she eventually dies, which does not happen in the book. And that is why Judith is actually sick first. She launches into this hyper-protective mode because she's trying to prevent something that she feels that she has already borne witness to from the future from happening. But she's so determined to prevent it from happening that she doesn't see the actual danger. And I don't think that's a spoiler, because that is very much hinted at from the beginning as well. It is a very poignant book. It is powerful. I loved it. It is definitely going to be one of my favorite reads of the year, if not my favorite. I still kind of waffle back and forth. I think Song of Solomon might win out in the end, because it is, I love so much of what that book is doing on so many levels. But my heart is with Hamnet, at least for the moment. I love it. It's a really great book, and I'm very eager to read more by Maggie O'Farrell. I've heard great things about I Am, which I believe is a memoir, and other books by her. Her writing is superb in Hamnet, if Hamnet is any indication, and I hope that it is. So that was the last book that I finished. There are two books that I am carrying over into September. First one is The Bass Rock by Evie, Wyld. I am reading this on NetGalley. I made it halfway through over the weekend after we decided to DNF Blonde. And it's interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how that book shakes out. I'm still kind of two minds. It's a very unpleasant book to read, but I think that's deliberate, and I think it's unpleasant in an interesting way. Many times, it's easy to dismiss a book for being unpleasant, but I think everything that's happening in The Bass Rock is deliberate. A lot's going to depend on where it goes and what happens in the last half of the book. So I had a very hard time getting into it. It's going to be interesting to see where I end up with it. There's still half the book to go, so we'll see. And then the other book that I am going to carry into September is the audiobook that I was listening to, which is The Court Dancer by Kyung-Sook Shin. I'm sad that I didn't finish it in the month of August because I was reading it for Women in Translation Month, and Anton is the translator, I believe. I had to look it up after my last video because since I've listened to the audio, it's not listed on it. And I really wanted to get it in for Women in Translation Month, but you know, I'm gonna carry Women in Translation Month into September, which is probably not a bad thing. And I am about halfway through that book as well. So a lot we'll see what happens with both of those books. I think it's going to be interesting for sure. I forgot a book. Let's go back to books that I finished. F is for Fugitive by Sue Grafton. It's sitting right next to me and I just saw it there. So yes, this is another book that I finished in the month of August. When I was really having trouble reading after I finished Hamnet, because that's really when the news started to blow up and the wildfires and more shootings happened and the pandemic kept going, I was really having a hard time. And when I am kind of struggling with reading, a good slump buster for me is to go back to my buddy Sue Grafton. Not all of her books are perfect, but they're always like comforting to me because I really like the character of Kinsey Milhone, who's the detective who goes throughout the series, and it's like a balm. And you know, it's funny, I never used to describe things as a balm until 2020, when you started to really need soothing, comforting things in your life. And this worked like a charm for that. I read it, usually I can read a Sue Grafton book in a day or 2 days, and this one took me, I think, 3. But it is also one of the longer books in the series so far. They get to about this length from here forward, I think. But point being, it was a wonderful distraction from the world, and it got me back on my feet so I could get back into some more reading and make some progress on Blonde, even though that, at least for now, came to nothing. But I just loved it. So this book is, of course, about a fugitive. Kinsey is hired because a man who was accused of killing his girlfriend, I think 17 years in the past, had been sent to jail and then escaped from jail, and he has just been recaptured. So his father hires Kinsey Milhone to try to prove that his son is not actually guilty so he can go free again. So that is the premise of the book. Of course, it's in a small town outside of Kinsey Milhone's usual stomping grounds of Santa Teresa, which is a fictional town based on Santa Barbara. And Sue Grafton is an author who is very much not interested in writing the same thing over and over again. So it feels deliberate that she got Kinsey outside of her usual town and put her in a different environment. And it also deprives her of the supporting characters. In the beginning, at least, Sue Grafton was very resistant to the idea of having supporting characters, and it feels like she embraces them more and more over time. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but the change of pace for Kinsey was also refreshing. And putting her in this small town where everybody knows each other and everybody has secrets is interesting. And it's not something you can do if she's in her usual stomping grounds. It just wouldn't necessarily work. And I really enjoyed it. And I'll talk more about this. So I've read, I have a wrap up where I covered A, B, C, and D for as an introduction to the Sue Grafton series. I'll link that down below. And now I've read E and F. If I get G and H in sometime soon, and I don't own physical copies of those, which is kind of frustrating because I had been purchasing ebooks of them and I don't read ebooks anymore. So I'd rather have the mass market. So I need to get myself a copy of G and H and see if I can get them in so I can do another full kind of wrap up on the next 4 books in the series. So stay tuned for that. All right, so that covers what I'm still reading, what I've finished, and what I DNF'd in August. Let's talk about some things that are coming up. I need to figure out what I'm doing for the BookTube prize because I haven't gotten to any of the 5 books I need to read to finish the nonfiction round for the finals, and it's going to be crunch time. So yeah, gotta think about that. And I also have 2 buddy reads starting. First one is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And we are supposed to start that this coming week, and I'm looking forward to that. I've wanted to read more books by Gabriel Garcia Marquez for a while, so this is a nice way to force myself into doing it. And I need to read an author from South America for my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, so this will perfectly cover that. And the other one is Gyasi's Transcendent Kingdom. I'm starting a buddy read of that this week as well, and I'm really looking forward to that because I'm a huge fan of the book Homegoing, and I've heard really great things about Transcendent Kingdom. I'm still trying not to know a whole lot about the plot when I go in, so that will be interesting. So that's everything I've read, DNF'd, and will continue to read and have coming up in September. I would love to hear what you've been up to reading-wise, health-wise. I hope everybody's staying safe and calm and sane in this crazy world. Just hang in there. we'll get through this year and whatever comes after. So let me know what you've been reading, what you've loved. If you have thoughts about any of these books, especially Blonde, leave it in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for it. If you subscribe, thank you for that. And as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.